record everything, and then put it in the book. Alright, good. Today I'm here to talk to you about nuclear war, its history, repercussions, what to do in the event, and its likelihood. Nuclear war has not been a national security concern since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, but it is now a concern more than ever in the war in Ukraine. Those caught within 1 kilometer of a blast are carbonized by heat rays, and those up to 1.5 kilometers away suffer from flash burning with their skin later peeling off. Nuclear weaponry has only increased in size and number, and many nations of the world refuse to completely remove their arsenals because of fear of the nations that would lie and go against the oath of permanent removal. If you flip a coin once, the likelihood of getting heads is 50%. If you flip that coin 10 times, the likelihood increases to 99% that you'll get a heads. A 1% chance of nuclear disaster in the next 40 years becomes 99% in 8,000 years. Ultimately, civil engagement has had no effect in stopping nuclear weapon use, and it is up to the powers that be who determine our destiny in their use. The history of nuclear science being weaponized starts with the Army Corps of Engineers and scientist Robert J. Oppenheimer when they worked to separate plutonium from uranium to utilize plutonium's natural ability of fission to be used in an implosion bomb. On July 16, 1945, they tested this explosive, which detonated with the energy equivalent to 20 kilotons of TNT. The desert sand was melted and became a radioactive green glass, and the crater left a hole 5 feet deep and 30 feet wide. The surrounding mountains were illuminated brighter than daytime for 1 to 2 seconds, and it was reported as being as hot as an oven at the observatory site. The shockwave took 40 seconds to reach them. It was felt over 100 miles away, and the mushroom cloud reached over 7.5 miles in height. Oppenheimer later quoted the Hindu sacred text, the Bhagavad Gita, saying, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," when his invention would later claim hundreds of thousands of lives in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1946, the UN calls for the dismantle of all nuclear weapons, and in 1955, scientists Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell create a manifesto stating the dangers and implications to using nuclear weapons. The first campaign towards the disarmament of nuclear weapons is created in 1958, and in 1961, the Russians create and detonate what's known as Tsar Bomba, a 58 megaton atmospheric weapon, the strongest detonated weapon in history. In 1962, the US and Russia have a standoff, igniting the Cold War when it's found that Russians have missiles in Cuba. A treaty is then signed between nations in Moscow in 1963, prohibiting the testing of nuclear weapons in outer space, the atmosphere, and underwater. In 1968, a sham treaty known as the Proliferation Treaty is signed that states agree to never acquire nuclear weapons and to disarm them, which history has shown obviously never happens. In 1986, Presidents Ronald Reagan and Russian Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev get together to talk on potential nuclear abolition, and the following year, the same two world powers agreed to forbid all intermediate-range missiles. The International Court of Justice presents an advisory opinion in 1964, which it claimed the risk of nuclear weapons would overall be against international law. However, they could not determine whether it was justified or not in the event of extreme circumstance in which the survival of the state is in jeopardy. Following the hearing that same year, a total nuclear ban to testing opens for signature, with China, France, the United Kingdom, Russia, United States, and other NATO countries being in agreement and signed the document, whereas India opposed and refused to sign the document. Today, the countries around the world that have a nuclear arsenal in order of their missile count are Russia, the United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, Pakistan, India, Israel, North Korea, and it is also thought that South Africa has a small inventory as well. If a nuclear war breaks out and half of the nuclear arsenal is used, we will see drastic impacts that could lead to freezing temperatures, as well as the destruction of agriculture and exports. The global average caloric production would decrease to 90% in this model, and it is estimated that 2/3 of the world population would be wiped out within weeks, and those that survived the initial blast would later die of starvation. In another model, a nuclear weapons attack of any size would change the climate enough to affect agriculture to where millions would die from resource shortages. The U.S. government has recently released information regarding what to do before, during, and after an attack in major cities such as New York and other outlying cities. The nuclear weapons can range in size from being individually carried to those that are fired from a missile projectile. Upon notice of an impending attack, shelter in place immediately, keeping your head away from doors and windows. If caught outside, lie down and cover your head so it protects you from flying debris. And if caught in a car, do the same to keep your head away from the glass and windows. Brick and concrete structures are the most secure in the basement or the middle of the building. Never look directly into the blast as it can blind you. And avoid reuniting with anyone to prevent contamination. Tune into local news and media outlets or what's available to you, as the electromagnetic pulse from the blast may have knocked out cell phones, TV, or internet. The next step is to prepare for the aftermath, gathering medical, food, hygiene, and basic survival supplies, as well as means of transportation. Trips to resupply should not be made unless absolutely necessary. And within the time frame of the blast occurring, depending on how far you are, you have roughly 10 minutes to shelter in place to avoid radioactive fallout. Upon taking shelter, immediately remove your clothes and wash yourself with what's available before tending to children and animals. Avoid using conditioner, as conditioner acts as a binding agent for radioactive particles to your skin and hair. It is only safe to eat food that has been stored indoors, as anything outdoors is likely contaminated. If sick, ill, or injured, wait for appropriate guidance from news media outlets. Hazards related to nuclear explosions include bright flash, shock wave, radiation, fire and heat, electromagnetic pulse, and fallout. Putin claims that if the West and other NATO countries continue to engage against the special operations in Ukraine, that they will have no option but to use their nuclear arsenal, to which Biden is now saying is a major threat. Nuclear war and its research are placing the world at stake, and even if no country went on the offensive, accidents have occurred in the past, such as Fukushima and Chernobyl. How much more can our planet tolerate? We need to end nuclear research and weapons as soon as possible. When it comes time that Putin gets wild hair and wants to use his nuclear arsenal, his commands will be transferred through his shiget, or his briefcase, which transmits his order to his Russian General Chief of Staff, who then portrays or relays the information to those commanders on the ground. A failsafe is in place known as a Paretmer, which grants the General Staff to launch missiles by bypassing all of their chain of commands. I believe nuclear war is very likely to happen if Putin is not controlled, as he is a former KGB operative who idolizes Stalin, whose only motive is power, and Putin and those like him have no regard for human life and are only after control.